General Myers, we're particularly pleased to have you here because your service from '98 to 2000 commanding NORAD gives you particular authority in talking about this. I think what disturbs us most with regard to NORAD is not so much that this was an unprecedented threat, and there were certainly problems relating to that with the orientation outward rather than inward, and the sad capabilities really compared to military radars of the FAA radars that had to be depended on for much of the information. What disturbs us most is that the glitches in command and control are glitches that had really nothing to do with the fact that it was an internal rather than external, because in the justification for maintaining NORAD, of course, the possibilities of intercepting airliners, hijacked airliners, was part of the justification from the beginning, although the expectation was they would be foreign airliners hijacked and incoming. So the problems of command and control, let's start at the top. Who was in charge on 9/11? Was it the NORAD commander? Was it you? Was it NMCC? Was it SecDef? Was it FAA? With all the exercising that had been done in the past, there clearly somebody should have been in charge, but we have been unable to find out who it was. And also, for all of my questions, if you could also say what's been done to change it, what's the situation today?
That's a lot. In terms of national command authorities, you've interviewed the president and the vice president, and I'm not privy to that interview, so I can't comment on that. I do know that the next person in the chain of command, Secretary Rumsfeld, was in contact with the president several times during that morning and through the rest of the day, to include, I believe it's at least 2 video teleconferences we had with the president. I may be wrong, there might be only one, but lots of conversations with the vice president.
No, but I'm talking about operationally.
And operationally, General Eberhart was on duty and at his duty station, as was General Arnold. And in fact, the first call I got when I left Capitol Hill after a meeting with Senator Cleland was from General Eberhart saying, we've had these crashes and that we're going to take certain actions. And it was shortly thereafter that the Pentagon was hit as we're on our way back to the Pentagon. So, as you know, I'm not in the chain of command. I'm a military advisor to the chain of command and to the National Security Council. So I went back to my duty station, and what we started doing at that time was to say, okay, we've had these attacks. Obviously, they're hostile acts. Not sure at that point who perpetrated them, and my focus at that point, and I think the Secretary's focus was, okay, what else is out there that is possibly going to happen, either in the United States or in other regions of the world? And that's where we started to focus. What is the next event to happen? It might not be an airliner. It might be some other attack. So we were looking outward. We were on a threat conference that developed, as you all know, and NORAD was represented on that. I had several conversations that day and early that morning with General Eberhart as we talked our way through the actions that were being taken. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the command and control was in place. The Secretary, except for the short period of time that he went outside to examine where the aircraft came into the Pentagon, and then to help, because at that point they needed hands, and he lended his hand to help those injured and those responding. But then came back in sometime around 10 o'clock and was upstairs. I know I talked to the president. I know he, in sometime in there, I know he went to what we call the ESC, but where the communications for the Secretary's office goes through. He was up there. He had a VTC with the White House, and about 10:30, he came down to the National Military Command Center, where we joined up, and we joined the rest of the day together.
Let's talk a little bit about technology and. Can
I just mention one other thing?
Sure.
Because you asked me to tell me what we've done. In the National Military Command Center, that day we did have trouble trying to conference the FAA into our threat conference that was ongoing. So we had to use a separate phone line for that, which was not as efficient. That's been that's been corrected. And as you know, our posture today is quite a bit different as we look at this threat and other potential threats. So we've improved our communications and we've refined our procedures both with the White House, with the FAA, and those procedures are in effect and are exercised.
Assets. I understand that there was a great argument during the period before 9/11 about whether NORAD should exist at all, and the reduction from 23 to 7 sites. Why, given the increasing threat discussion of the possibility of hijackings and the intentions of al-Qaeda, was this such a big issue? Because with so many fighter aircraft based around the country, Reserve, Guard, Navy, Marine, Air Force, why is it an asset issue? Why can't there be a much broader allocation of assignment of alert throughout the country to deal with the threat that was becoming so evident?
I think it's because the threat was not perceived to be so evident, and we were following the same guidance that we got right after the fall of the Soviet Union is where is the dividend from this? And so forces were scaled down, alert facilities which are expensive to maintain were closed, and we wound up with those 7 sites. And I think you all know where they are.
Why is that so? I mean, why do they have to be owned assets? Why is it so expensive just to require rotating units to sit on alert and keep the aircraft armed as opposed to their normal training cycle?
Well, it's just it's the priorities that the Defense Department goes through to balance risk. And again, the threat perception was not there to balance that risk.
But it seems to me a false dichotomy, because the assets exist. They're there. All of the services have huge training ready capabilities. It's not as if you have to buy and own separate aircraft for NORAD. Why is it even an issue?
And by the way, that was the NORAD plan. The NORAD plan was, as the threat became more apparent, then we had access to Navy, Marine, and Air Force aircraft, and we brought them up. I think the last number I remember, we could bring 3,000 aircraft to defend this country, not to mention the Canadian aircraft that would be participating as well. So we could bring them up. We had alert sites designated. So the plan was to do that, but you had to start with the perception of the threat and what we were asked to do. And our clear direction was to look outward. And in fact, as General Arnold said, we fought many phantoms that day. There were many phantoms. I remember getting to the NMCC, and we got the call that a bomb had gone off in front of the State Department. So you think, oh my goodness, what else is happening in this town? We got many aircraft calls inbound that morning that turned out to be phantoms. So we were clearly looking outward. We did not have the situational awareness inward because we did not have the radar coverage. And that, by the way, will become an issue here later on as we discuss the fate of the FAA radars that exist in this country today, whether or not we keep radars and have situational awareness for the interior of this country.
And why shouldn't the Air Force today and the Army, the military, look at our domestic defense as part of their mission in terms of the airspace? It's a huge gap between the normal common capabilities of tactical units, not only strategic units, of the radar sophistication and capability compared to what the FAA is stumbling along with. What do you recommend we do about that?
They are doing it. In fact, Army radars and Army air defense systems, as you know, are part of our defense of certain places. The National Capital Region is one of those places. We also have, as you know, lots of aircraft on alert today where we can respond to those potential sites that we have identified that might be of interest to future terrorist action. So today there are a lot of resources being brought to that. I think General Eberhart will recommend and has recommended to the department that we work with the FAA to determine who's going to pay for the radars for the interior of the country so we can have the situational awareness that we think we need. And that's being debated now. My guess is it'll be a 06 budget issue as we go forward. And your recommendations in that regard would be helpful.
As you know, the Israeli Air Force has exercised, practiced, and developed techniques for dealing with hijacked aircraft for years and years. For instance, they carry special missiles that are not to destroy, designed not to destroy airliners, but to force them to land, missiles with inert warheads and other sophisticated gear. What have you guys done to equip our Air Guard and other NORAD potentially assigned units with the training, with the rules of engagement, and the hardware that gives them an option other than what we have now, which is just to destroy the aircraft and all its passengers?
I'm aware of at least one program which is classified, so we can either talk about it offline or provide you the classified paper on it. There may be others to do exactly that.
President Bush told us in our interview that he was deeply dissatisfied with the ability to communicate from Air Force One. He told us that this was a very major flaw. Has this been fixed, and are you personally satisfied that those communications have been improved sufficiently so that a president will have the connectivity that he didn't have that day?
Let me answer that for the record so I can be very specific on that. Let me answer that for the record.
Okay. One of the happy instances of the day was that NORAD happened to be fully mobilized in a CP exercise and had everybody in effect at battle stations. And even so, we saw these glitches like the failure to pass on rules of engagements to the pilots over the capital area. If they hadn't been at fully mobilized status, what would have happened then? Would it have been much worse?
Well, I'd let General Eberhardt answer that, but from my experience, no, it wouldn't have been much worse. It was fortuitous that was the case, but certainly at the Northeast Air Defense Sector, Southeast, the Konar region, at NORAD, there are people that are always on duty to respond, and whether or not we had the exercise or not, people would have responded, and my best estimate is that the response would have been very similar, even with the not having all those additional people that might have been present for an exercise. But I'd let General Eberhardt talk about that.
Secret Service has told us that they had repeatedly before 9/11 requested alert aircraft to protect the Capitol, particularly at Andrews Air Force Base and other air defense, and that this was never acted on by the Pentagon. Was there a reason why that was
That
not
never
acted?
came to my attention. I was never, as the vice chairman at the time, and I started in 1 March of 2000. From the time I was the vice chairman, I was never aware, or even as NORAD, I was never aware of a request from the Secret Service for that kind of service.
But when you were NORAD commander, there had already been a private aircraft that crashed into the White House grounds. There were repeated and written worries about the potential for private aircraft to make suicide attacks, and there were 11 separate intelligence reports circulating broadly through the intelligence community that Al-Qaeda had planned to use aircraft as weapons, although the focus was overseas. Didn't anybody at NORAD try to connect the dots and say that this is something we've got to worry about, that it's a target in the capital area, that we better get ready for it? But instead, when even NORAD's own planning staff proposed to include in exercises the dealing with hijacked suicide aircraft, it was rejected by NORAD, by the NORAD commander, I think it was after your time, as something to be exercised and planned for.
I think it was rejected, and General Eberhardt could be clear on this. I don't think it was by the commander. I think it was by the planning group that was meeting because it did not fit the scenario at the time. But the use of aircraft as weapons, as a missile, other than World War II and the kamikaze situation, I'm not aware, and I've tried to research this, and the best information I get, I am not aware that an aircraft has ever been used as a weapon. Now, there have been landings in the White House lawn. There was a landing in Red Square. There have been lots of stupid things. There was talk about crashing airplanes into the CIA, but in most of that threat reporting leading up to 9/11, it was hijacking an airplane and in the normal hijack mode, not in the mode of a weapon. Now, there were some talks about in post-hijack situations where they talked to the people or where the demands were made that they were going to crash one of the incidents into the Eiffel Tower. But even the work that was done, the hijackings that were planned for the Philippines, which is a well-known plot, they planned to hijack the airplanes and blow them up primarily. So, no, the threat perception, there was not, the intelligence did not point to this kind of threat, and that's, I think that explains our
Final
posture.
question. As NORAD commander and now as chairman, were you then and are you now satisfied with the intelligence product that your J2 provides to you?
Well, we've got a wonderful J2, and we've got a pretty good process. Information sharing is better today among the intel agencies, both civilian and military, and the CIA. It can be improved. We still have a ways to go in that regard. It's still, when we get threat warnings, you know, the venue, the type of attack, those kind of details are usually lacking. And we do have, as I think people well understand and was announced publicly by, I think, the Attorney General the other day, still threats to the United States. And as a free nation, with the freedom that we enjoy, as Secretary Ridge says, you know, we've got to be right every time, and a suicide operative only has to be right once. And we worry about that very much. And with General Eberhardt's hat as Northern Command, I think helps to focus all this in ways that we couldn't do before 9/11 because we've organized ourselves much differently. But am I satisfied? No, I'll never be satisfied. This is very, very tough work.
Thank you, General.